Hello, and welcome. This is a webinar on the Neuromodulation Devices Market, Innovations and Trends, presented by the teams of Medtech Insight and Meddevicetracker from Informa Pharma Intelligence. Thanks for joining us today. I'm David Filmore, Editor-in-Chief of Medtech Insight, and joining me today are Marion Webb, Managing Editor with Medtech Insight, and Chrystal Larsen, Lead Market Analyst for Meddevicetracker. Neuromodulation is an area of high growth within the medical device sector. It includes multiple modalities and addresses a range of indications that are central to important contemporary healthcare challenges. It's a highly competitive sector that brings in just about all of the big medtech players, as well as a healthy dose of startups globally. Today, Chrystal will provide a brief overview of what we mean when we discuss neuromodulation, and then she will dig into the current market dynamics, growth forecasts, and drivers, as well as competitive environment and technology trends. Then Marion will spotlight developments and trends in an interesting subcategory of the sector, peripheral nerve stimulation. I'll follow that up briefly to highlight the U.S. government's strong interest in technologies like neuromodulation devices, specifically in alignment with priorities to fight the opioid abuse epidemic, and more generally, the strong current focus on improving the reimbursement process for new medical technology. If you have a question, feel free to submit it at any time. There's an Ask the Question box below the slides. We'll try to get to your submitted question during the webinar, but if we can't get to yours during the session, we'll make an effort to respond following the webinar. Also, you should see a red tech support button on your page. Please use that if you do run into any technical issues. Finally, these slides that we present today will be available to all registered participants after the webinar. With that, I'll pass it over to Chrystal to start with her presentation. Chrystal?
Thanks a lot, David. I'm going to provide a general overview of neuromodulation, one of the largest and most dynamic medical device markets on the market today. Neuromodulation provides stimulation therapy to the nervous system for treatment of neurological disorders or chronic pain. And the human body, just to give you a basic overview, the human body is electric, and the central and peripheral nervous systems are a vast and amazing neurochemical communications network of nerve cells or neurons that transmit information using nerve impulses to and from the body and the brain. And there are billions of nerve cells. So neuromodulation, also commonly termed neurostimulation therapy, applies mild electric current using thin electrical leads to stimulate targeted nerves, and it's powered by implantable pulse generators. And the goal of neuromodulation is to modulate abnormal nerve activity or to alleviate chronic pain due to nerve damage or other neurological symptoms such as tremor or seizures. It was pioneered by Medtronic, who invented the external cardiac pacemaker, and they also invented deep brain stimulation and spinal cord stimulation. And it's been in use since the late 1960s with broader commercial use in the 1970s and 80s, but the majority of growth has occurred over the past 5 to 7 years. And it is indicated not for all patients with chronic pain, but severe intractable cases when traditional medication and surgery fails. Okay, neuromodulation devices are very similar in design of cardiac pacemakers, which stimulate the heart muscle using electrodes to correct the abnormal heartbeat. So if you see in that graphic, the electrode is stimulating the heart muscle, and the IPG is implanted in the upper chest. So neuromodulation devices instead target nerves implicated in neurological disorders. So I'm going to discuss the largest neuromodulation segments that I profiled in our report that we'll be linking at the end of the webinar. There are so many different areas in neuromodulation and emerging areas, but the top 4 segments are spinal cord stimulation, or SCS, deep brain stimulation, or DBS, vagus nerve stimulation, or VNS, and sacral nerve stimulation, or SNS. And for the purpose of this webinar, we are excluding the last segment, even though it's rather substantial because it is monopolized by Medtronic with their InterStim and neuro systems for treating overactive bladder. And I'm also excluding cochlear implants, which is one of the original neurostimulation markets for hearing loss. going to define the 3 core areas of this webinar. SCS, which you see by the images, stimulates spinal cord. DBS stimulates the brain, and VNS stimulates the vagus nerve. And I wanted to just really profile SCS because that's the largest market. So basically, when you feel pain, it's because your nerves are sending pain signals from the site of pain through your spinal cord into the brain. So SCS transmits mild electrical impulses to your nerves along the spinal cord to mask the pain. And it does this by blocking or changing the pain signals and replacing the sensation with a tingling sensation called paresthesia. So it basically blocks the pain sensation before it reaches the brain. So this typically results in at least 50% and up to 80% reduction in pain, although it varies per patient. And SCS is not a cure, but it significantly alleviates pain. And it is not indicated for everyone with chronic pain, but for chronic intractable pain of the trunk and or limbs, such as failed back syndrome, patients that have had multiple back surgeries and are still experiencing debilitating pain, DDD or degenerative disc disease, radicular pain from DDD or herniated disc, and several other indications. So the next area, DBS, deep brain stimulation, targets specific areas of the brain involved in movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease, and it blocks the abnormal nerve signals responsible for involuntary movements or tremor. And the last area, VNS, targets the left vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is a major nerve network that communicates sensory information to the brain. So it effectively controls seizures. And VNS is also used in other areas such as chronic migraine. Okay, so now I'm just going to briefly go over some prevalence statistics for the 3 areas. SCS has the largest market. Overall, there are approximately 1.5 billion people suffering from chronic pain worldwide, and about 100 million chronic pain sufferers in the U.S. and 30 million in the U.S. who suffer from chronic back pain. And SCS is important because it's addressing the growing opioid epidemic in the U.S. In particular, which is a hot topic for the Trump administration. And approximately 100 people die every day from opioid overdose. So SCS is providing a medical device alternative for several patients. DBS targets Parkinson's disease, of which there are approximately 10 million worldwide and over 1 million in the U.S. Essential tremor, which there's up to 10 million in the U.S., and dystonia, which is smaller prevalence, about 300,000. And I don't have worldwide numbers for these. VNS targets epilepsy, of which there are up to 65 million worldwide and about 3.5 in the U.S. And drug refractory epilepsy, which people do not respond to medication, are approximately 1 million. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss the overall global neuromodulation market for those 4 areas, including sacral nerve stimulation. We approximated at nearly 4.3 billion in 2017. And the 3 core areas, SCS, DBS, and VNS, contributed about 85% of the market, or 3.6 billion. And SCS, the majority of sales, or 60%, about 2.5 billion. And I wanted to note that this market is large, has substantial revenues because it not only includes the IPGs and leads, but also lead extensions and the remote control and the patient, the patient programmer and the surgeon programmers and surgical tools and other products. So, and it also involves not only the trial system implant, but the permanent implant surgery and the battery replacement. So it's a substantial market and lucrative. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about our valuations and growth expectations for the 3 segments. All 3 are experiencing good growth in the upper single digits or double digits, with the highest growth segment, SCS. SCS we estimate at 2.5 billion in 2017, growing to 4.7 billion in 2022 at a compound annual growth rate of 13.2. DBS we have at 620 million growing to over $1 billion in 2022 at 11.8 growth rate. VNS at 450, growing to almost 700 million in 2022 with a CAGR of about 9%. So, like I said, those three core areas contribute about 3.6, nearly doubling to 6.5 at an overall rate of almost 13%. And this is even conservative because SBS segment is showing double-digit rates in the 20s. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss some general market drivers and limiters, and this is for all segments. I have more detailed drivers and limiters in the individual reports, but overall, the market drivers, the aging population is affected by chronic pain and incurable neurological disorders is driving growth. As we said before, the growing opioid epidemic and the real need for non-pain medication alternatives. So SBS is fitting in well here. The largest SBS segment is driving growth, as well as the other two, doing double-digit growth. A good long clinical history for all areas. And really, the focus of this webinar is innovation, which is really driving growth. All the manufacturers have introduced next-generation systems with that are steadily improving therapy, so that's really helping. And in the past, the market suffered from low penetration or lack of awareness, but it is steadily increasing. Surgeon awareness, patient awareness, and acceptance, and skilled surgeon networks. And also all the manufacturers are really heavily promoting their systems. And also another big factor is the expanding indications. All the manufacturers are trying to expand the indications just from the traditional areas to other new areas such as peripheral nerve stimulation and non-surgical back pain and neck pain, etc. So that's really impacting the market. Some market limiters are, of course, patient reluctance for implants or surgery, surgical and device risks, although they're small, surgical complexity in the surgeon learning curve. For example, it's rather complex to tunnel the lead to the IPG and to target the nerve correctly. The second, battery replacement surgery, because of the cost and it's burdensome for the patient to have two surgeries. The high cost of the surgery, it can range to up to $50,000 or more, although it has good reimbursement because it's medically necessary. Regulatory restrictions, especially outside the U.S., about 80% of the market is currently derived from the U.S., so there's room for growth internationally. Heavy competition and pricing pressure, and the lack of clinical studies comparing the systems, especially with the newer systems and newer indications. Okay, the competitive landscape of 2017, as you see, Medtronic dominates two areas, SBS and DBS, because they are the pioneers in those two segments. So SBS, the competitors, or five major competitors, Medtronic, Abbott, Boston Scientific, Nevro, and a smaller competitor, Nevectra. DBS, Medtronic, Abbott, and Boston Scientific, and VNS, Livanova, and NeuroPace, which is a smaller competitor. Okay, I've broken down market share by segment for 2017 for the three areas. And again, Medtronic led both segments, SBS and DBS, in 2017, but barely in the SBS segment. Abbott has been making real inroads, and in 2018, they are expected to replace Medtronic as the number one due to diverse stimulation, which we'll be discussing later. But Medtronic contributed about $850 million in sales and 34% market share in 2017. Abbott about $750 million, Boston $585, Nevro about $330 million, and Nevectra about $30 million. And then in the DBS segment, Medtronic has about 80% or more than 80% market share because they pioneered and are well established in that area with their Activa line. So $508 million. Abbott and Boston have small shares, but they just entered the market, so Medtronic no longer monopolizes it, and they've been steadily increasing share. So we have about 62 million and 50 million for Boston. Okay, and the last segment, VNS, is dominated by Livanova with their VNS therapy, which has been highly effective for treating refractory epilepsy. So they recorded about $375 million in 2017, or over 80% market share. And NeuroPace, a smaller privately held competitor, we estimate around $75 million. And that could vary because they don't release financials. And I wanted to point out that their therapy is included in VNS, even though it is not doesn't stimulate the vagus nerve. It's called responsive nerve stimulation. It's more like deep brain stimulation. And they're doing pretty well with their therapy, but I did include it because it is the epilepsy area. And also, Medtronic recently entered the market in 2018 with their Activa line for treating epilepsy. So they are going to be a new competitor in 2018. So I wanted to make that note. Quarterly growth, I just wanted to show you recently the three top competitors, Abbott and Boston and Medtronic. I wanted to show their growth rate. Abbott is doing well, averaging 14% growth over the 2 quarters. Boston is doing better than that at 26%. They've been doing well because of their Waverider and Versailles, which I'll be discussing. Medtronic had been losing share, posting a negative growth the first 2 quarters of their fiscal year. They have an odd fiscal year. But recently, they've been posting double-digit growth, and they have been referencing this. The reason for the growth is due to their new Telus SCS system. So recently, about 17% growth, and their sales are pain therapies, which also include the Synchromed pump, but due to the FDA consent decree, they were experiencing declines in sales in that area. So it's mostly SCS, neuromodulation. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss a variety of technological trends and innovations driving this market. And this is for all of the areas. Overall, miniaturization is key. All the manufacturers are trying to reduce the size of their devices or IPGs, such as the new Telus system. Improved lead technologies, they're all addressing ways to improve like the waveforms, the customization to more closely target or the nerves. So improved precision and targeting is important, such as new directional leads. Less invasive, avoiding the implantation of IPGs altogether, such as SPR Therapeutics, which we will be discussing later. Longer life batteries or recharge-free systems, and customizing therapy or patient tracking. Wireless communication are becoming important therapies or features. Also, new indications and targets, such as peripheral nerve stimulation, and DRG, chronic pain syndrome, or complex regional pain syndrome. Also, improving the trial process is important since it is quite, another stage that the patients have to go through, the initial stage. And overall, the future goal is to significantly improve pain relief to, 80% or higher. 100% would be great, ideal, but they're all working on that with their next generation systems. Combining SCS and peripheral nerve stimulation is as seen in the new Telus and other systems. The future of neuromodulation, which I'll be discussing, is the next generation of closed-loop responsive systems, which is eliminating patient use of remote control altogether, as in Saluda Medical. And non-invasive peripheral and brain stimulation technology is another trend. Okay, so now, hopefully we have time. I'm going to be going over the next generation systems launched by the major manufacturers. Like I said, Abbott has been doing quite well and gaining share on Medtronic due to their burst DR stimulation, SCS systems. They introduced 2 new systems, also the proclaimed DRGs. So their proprietary burst DR stimulation waveform technology is important because it emits closely spaced high-frequency electrical impulses that are delivered in bursts, similar to the way the natural burst-firing nerve impulses occur in the nervous system. So It's said to be able to address both physical pain and emotional suffering, or changes in the way the body perceives pain, which has been resulting in more significant pain relief. And the Proclaim, recently FDA approved, is the first the SCS device approved for treating complex regional pain syndrome. And that has been important for them, and it's been exhibiting 80% pain reduction. It has been treating chronic intractable pain of the lower limbs, or the foot, knee, and hip. So let's see, Boston Scientific has introduced some new spectral Waverider. Actually, not too new, but well, January 2018, and it offers both paresthesia. This is an important new feature. They're including both the option of having paresthesia and no paresthesia, which is a tingling sensation. It's the first SCS system also with waveform automation and contour field shaping, and they're touting the ability to provide better, more coverage of the nerves with spanning up to 3 vertebral levels. And they also are combining therapy options for greater customization as the patient pain requirements change. So they're doing quite well with this system. Okay, and then on to Medtronic's new Telus. Medtronic doesn't sit long before that they regain market share with their innovations. So they have introduced the new Telus system late 2017, and it's been CE marked after that. It is claimed to be the world's smallest implantable neurostimulator, at 40% smaller than their last generation. It's powered by patented overdrive battery technology, which is important because it recharges in only an hour. And it also features evolved technology. The importance is they're including better patient tracking, so that the surgeons are using a wireless tablet that records patient activity and patient positions and therapy usage. So it's better customized therapy. And also important, they're including adaptive stim, which is their patented technology that adapts or changes stimulation or adjusts it when a patient changes position. So that's been a good technology of theirs. They also have led MRI coverage or compatibility. And they are planning on offering a combination of peripheral nerve and SCS therapy. And they are waiting on the vector study, which is going to be presented in NAMS 2019. So they're waiting on that. Okay, a couple more in the SCS area. I wanted to mention Nevro because they are a growing competitor. Their sales reached about $330 million in 2017, and recently they're experiencing 20% growth rate, and they plan to reach about $390 million this year. And they're doing well because their Senza system has proprietary features, high-frequency therapy, and it has demonstrated nearly 80% reduction in pain. So it's the first system that is proven clinically in their Senza RCT trial. About 75% reduction in back pain and 73% reduction in leg pain versus the traditional 50% or more. So they were also the first to offer paresthesia-free therapy, and they have a long battery life. So they're a company to watch. Okay, since we mostly focus on SCS, I wanted to just briefly mention 2 companies that have entered the DBS area, stealing share from Medtronic. Abbott has introduced the Infinity DBS, and Boston Scientific the Vercise system. And both differ because they both offer new directional lead technology that allows more precise targeting of the nerves in the brain with fewer side effects for Parkinson's disease and movement disorders. So, like Abbott's Infinity has segmented electrodes that are individually controlled, and so does Boston. Boston features the MICC lead technology that sculpts the current field. So it's supposed to offer a better, more precise coverage and fewer side effects. And so Boston also introduced the next generation Vercise Javia that gained CE market in Europe. And they are uniquely featuring the longest battery life with 25 years, rechargeable battery life, and other good features, next generation features. So they are two systems to watch. Okay, finally, Saluda Medical. It's said to be the next generation of neuromodulation. They have introduced an investigational system called the Evoke, which is the first patented closed-loop neurostimulation system for chronic pain, and they're also looking at entering other applications, such as DBS. So it's investigational, but viewed as the future of neuromodulation, as I said before, because it continuously measures and records the body's response of neurons to stimulation, and it automatically adjusts to the preferred stimulation level. So therefore, it's called a closed-loop system. And this is important because it eliminates the patient need to use a remote control altogether, so it provides automatic stimulation. And Medtronic, of course, is the major investor. So we believe they're looking to help pioneer the next generation of response closed-loop systems for SDS and other applications, very similar to what they've done in the diabetes market with their closed-loop artificial pancreas, the MiniMed 670G. So, and their pipeline includes not only DBS, but peripheral nerve stimulation, such as the sciatic and tibial and vagus nerves, and they've secured about $40 million in funding. Okay, the last company I'm profiling is Brainway, and they're in they have introduced deep PMS, which is deep transcranial magnetic stimulation for major depression and other applications. And in my report, I profiled several companies that have designed non-invasive deep brain stimulation technologies for treating major depression and other disorders. It was recently approved in May 2018 for MDD, and they also gained a de novo approval for OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, and a CE mark approval for several indications such as Alzheimer's and autism and PTSD and MDD. So with this system, it's outpatient, requires no anesthesia, and 20-minute sessions. And it's said to stimulate broader, deeper and broader neuronal targets than conventional TMS with a larger volume of gray matter. And in their pivotal trial, they revealed a response rate of 38.4 versus 21% with sham after 20 sessions. And they've had, they say they've treated 15,000 patients and conducted over 60 clinical studies with good reimbursement. So this is an interesting company. And 38% might not seem a lot, but with a person with major depression who, the threat of suicide, any kind of change is really important. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. I just wanted to say that overall, the neuromodulation market is experiencing very fast-paced technological innovation that's driving growth in the double digits. And although there are many competitors in the space, there's room for nearly all of them due to the specialized needs for each patient and each competitor's unique proprietary technology. So we expect this neuromodulation market to achieve the same success and acceptance as the $10 billion cardiac pacemaker market due to the fast-paced innovation, increasing awareness and utilization, the aging population, the opioid epidemic, and several other factors. Okay, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chrystal, for that informative and comprehensive presentation. Before we move on, a question here or two. Actually, just on a general point, there was a question on just making sure we will be providing the slides to registered listeners, which we absolutely will after the conclusion of the presentation. So certainly look out for those. More substantively, Chrystal, on sort of factors holding back the sector, you've mentioned certainly, as your numbers show, neuromodulation, SCS in particular, is an area of growth. But what are some of the biggest limitations in the SCS segment in your view?
Okay, probably the dynamic nature of pain, which makes it very difficult to treat. And also the lack of the system adjustability or customization to each of the patient's changing pain needs. So such as the ability to deliver stimulation or adjust the power to target new pain locations or expand pain coverage. So this is probably limited, though, the effectiveness of previous generation SCS systems. But we see, as I presented before, all the manufacturers are developing new improved systems for such as the burst DR stimulation by Abbott, Medtronic's adaptive spin, and new Telus, and Nevro's high frequency system, and Saluta's closed loop system. So they're all addressing these limitations. So secondly, I think the lack of clinical studies for the newer systems and the newer indications is a limitation, and also regulatory restrictions outside the U.S. and the EU. So like I said, the majority of the market is derived from the U.S. currently, so there's room to work on international markets. And that's about it. Those are I see the three key limitations.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting. And, just sort of related to that in terms of issues impacting, adoption, what are some of the side effects of SCS that might impact treatment decisions?
Yeah, I didn't touch on the side effects, but there are small surgical and device risks, including infection and lead migration that would require resurgery, pain at the implant site, paralysis, although small, unwanted jolting or shocking, and loss of therapy. And another side effect, or if you call it, is that treatment varies per patient. So, but even patients really have to outweigh the small risk with the possible significant alleviation of symptoms. So even a 30% reduction in excruciating, debilitating pain can improve the quality of life. So if it's even more effective, say 50% or higher, or 80%, then SCS can be very worthwhile. The treatment varies per patient.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Chrystal. Appreciate that. Well, why don't we move on in the interest of time? Let's move on to Marion now to hear about what's happening in peripheral nerve stimulation. Marion?
Yes, hi. Thank you, David. Okay, so as we've heard from Chrystal, while demand for spinal cord stimulators continues to expand at double-digit rates, the smaller segment of peripheral nerve stimulation is lagging behind their success. But the good news is that there is a growing number of innovative companies that are focusing their efforts entirely on PMS devices. And that's to the excitement of two neurosurgeons who I've interviewed for a recent story in Medtech Insight. Now, they've told me that they're looking for better options to treat an intractable population that's seen little success with standard therapy. And they find that PMS systems that are minimally invasive may be a good option for some of these patients, even if the success rate of these devices is lower than that of the widely studied SCS systems that Chrystal just presented. So just to give you a very quick and simple explanation, PMS devices are different from spinal cord stimulators in that the electrodes are placed directly over the nerve at the targeted area of pain. And it's typically connected to a small generator that gets implanted into the patient's body. So peripheral neuropathy has many causes, from trauma or vascular and blood problems, autoimmune disease to cancer, among others. But in the U.S., diabetes is the leading cause of polyneuropathy. About 60 to 70% of people with diabetes have mild to severe forms of damage to sensory, motor, or autonomic nerves that cause symptoms such as tingling, numbness, or burning feet, or weakness on the trunk and pelvis. And that's according to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. The PMS devices market is driven by some of the same factors that also drive the spinal cord stimulation market, namely the rising trend of minimally invasive surgery and push to find alternatives to opioids, especially in the U.S. But there is also a growing awareness now by physicians of the advantages of PMS systems, mainly to manage patients who didn't respond well to medications or other therapies. One neurosurgeon told me that one of the reasons why more companies haven't been developing PMS systems is because of a lack of insurance coverage. And because these devices aren't covered, adoption has been very limited. And because of the limited use, there also haven't been many long-term studies done that show these devices are safe and effective. So the lack of reimbursement and the need for long-term studies are among the growth limiters. So let's take a closer look at some of the promising PMS devices. The first and only FDA-cleared PMS device for treating both chronic and acute pain, the Sprint system, was developed by SPR Therapeutics. Now, most PMS systems are only approved for chronic pain, so this makes this device unique and opens up the doorway a lot, and that's according to Dr. Stephen Falofsky, who is the Director of Surgery at St. Luke's University Health Network, who I spoke with recently for a story. He said that, therefore, this device can be used as an alternative for opioids for patients with acute pain, such as patients after a large surgical procedure like a hip or knee replacement. The other big benefit here is that the FDA cleared this device for use for up to 60 days in the back or extremities for relieving chronic, intractable, and post-surgical or post-traumatic pain. And because it can be removed at the end of 60 days of treatment, the company says it's less costly and much less invasive compared to other PMS systems. You can see in the photo on the right that this device is connected to a small patch-like external stimulator. So this is an option for people who don't want a battery implanted under their skin. In clinical studies, the findings have shown that 72% of chronic pain patients treated with the Sprint device experienced an equal or greater than 50% reduction in pain intensity or pain interference. And this month, SPR Therapeutics landed a $10 million grant from the Department of Defense, and that brings its total government grants and contracts to $30 million. Now, the next device, Byunsys Stim Router, already received FDA clearance in 2015 after it received the CE mark in 2014, and recently was also approved by the Canadian government. So the company says that this device targets 22 different peripheral nerves in the body, from the suprascapular nerve all the way down to the tibial nerve. And Dr. Jay Shah, who's a pain specialist in New York, told me that clinically it's been used for conditions like post-stroke related shoulder pain that can be implanted along the course of upper and lower extremity nerves. And it's comparable to the Sprint system. But the battery here is implanted underneath the skin, not outside the skin, which is the case with the Sprint system. As a matter of fact, with this system, all electronics are moved outside of the body into a wearable transdermal system, which reduces implantation and anesthesia time from 90 minutes to 15 to 30 minutes, and that's according to Byunsys. Now, a 7-patient study to manage post-stroke shoulder pain showed an average 70% reduction in chronic pain. And last May, Byunsys announced that it received insurance coverage from Aetna and most recently also from Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. Now, electrocore's GammaCore device is different because it's completely non-invasive for treating acute migraine and cluster headache, which is a huge market. And because it's non-invasive, more patients are willing to try it. As you can see in the photo, the patient simply holds the device on the neck to stimulate the vagus nerve, which plays a significant role in regulating pain. And the GammaCore device received FDA clearance in January of this year for treating acute migraine, and last April also received an FDA de novo release for treating episodic cluster headache. It's also approved for marketing in Europe. Dr. Shah told me he's using this device in his clinic for patients with cluster headache whose pain remains refractory after having tried standard care such as medication therapy or oxygen therapy. And this company completed a $70 million Series B funding round just last November. Now, this device, the QuadraTens unit, can't be compared to the effectiveness of SCS systems but has shown some success in alleviating common types of chronic and intractable pain. Now, what makes this device unique or different is that it's sold over the counter without a prescription, and it's the first FDA-cleared device for treating chronic pain during sleep. As you can see, it's a simple device. The electronics are carried in a neoprene band that's worn on the upper calf, and the electrode interfaces with the skin. Now, it's designed to treat arthritis, diabetic nerve pain, fibromyalgia, lower back, and leg pain. And just this year, Neurometrics, which sells the product in the U.S., signed an agreement with the big pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline to expand international sales of the Quell. Under the agreement, GlaxoSmithKline gains exclusive ownership of the Quell for markets outside the U.S. and up to $21 million for meeting certain milestones. Now, this last device in my presentation, Mainstay Medical's Reactive 8, addresses one of the largest chronic pain populations, namely chronic low back pain, and has a lot of potential, that's according to the pain specialists I spoke with. Its mechanism of action is different in that it is an implantable device that electronically stimulates the nerves that are responsible for activating or contracting key stabilizing muscles in the lumbar spine, and it's believed to restore muscle control and to stabilize the spine over time. Now, this treatment is similar in function to stabilizing exercises that would be given by a physical therapist to help patients regain muscle control, except that with this device, patients use a small handheld remote control for 30 minutes twice a day to achieve just that same outcome. This company is currently conducting a clinical trial with 204 patients, and the results are expected by year end. And the company hopes to use the data to file for U.S. approval and also for approval in Australia. The company raised $30 million in February to fund the U.S. trial and to advance its commercialization in Europe. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Appreciate that good presentation on PNS. And let's see what we have in terms of one question here. You mentioned that PNS systems have been falling short compared to SCS systems. Why is that?
Well, there are several reasons, but one doctor told me that he feels that they just haven't shown the staggering success rate of SCS systems. He said that with SCS systems, they've seen an 80 to 90% success rate. But with PNS devices, doctors may tolerate a lower rate, such as maybe a 50 to 70% response rate, because these patients often don't have many other treatment options left. And he told me because it's non-invasive, it doesn't carry the same risk as implanting a device, where this kind of success rate would definitely not be acceptable. And, some patients simply don't want to have an implantable device. And as I discussed earlier, insurance, of course, is another issue. Many of these devices still aren't covered by insurance, so doctors may not offer them to patients, especially if the cost is high. And the other issue is there just haven't been enough clinical studies done to show that these devices are safe and effective.
Okay, great, thanks. Why don't we, I know there's a few questions in there. We have one more part of the presentation. Let's see what we can get there done and then see what time. As I mentioned, we will certainly look to respond to questions after the webinar as well, if that makes more sense from a standpoint of providing good details. So what we will do next, I think, is I'll briefly spotlight with my slides some federal policy considerations that could impact this space. Let me just move along here. So, as mentioned, I think a few times on the session so far, is one factor driving attention to this space is the role of neuromodulation and similar technologies as a pain control alternative in the face of opioid addiction crisis. In addition to being a market driver, that issue is capturing the attention of federal policymakers in the U.S., including the Food and Drug Administration, Medicare, and other agencies. There's a high focus in particular on the opioid issue by FDA, and devices are getting significant attention by the agency in that context. One sign is that the innovation challenges announced earlier this year, a particular innovation challenge for the opioid devices in the opioid space. The idea is to encourage companies to submit medical devices that offer alternative pain control or address the opioid epidemic in another way. And selected companies, which will be announced November 1st, will benefit from enhanced collaboration with FDA and other factors intended to accelerate the review and approval process for the devices. So I think that's a noteworthy sign of high interest in any technology, including some of the next generation neuromodulation technologies that you heard discussed a little bit here from Chrystal and Marion. That this can provide a different approach to pain control, and there's an interest in speeding those along to market from FDA. But I think also noteworthy is, FDA may not be, the biggest barrier to market for new technologies at this point. I think increasingly, and also as sort of alluded to on this call, reimbursement, it can be a big challenge. Reimbursement pathways and payments, certainly have been established for the more established applications of neuromodulation, but, there's still some challenges for in some areas, and doesn't always align with sort of the actual use needs in clinical practice. So I think this attention to the opioid epidemic is also relevant here. In particular, there's been a lot of focus in Congress and by the White House. And in Congress recently passed opioid legislation, and it's going to be signed, I think, actually today, potentially as we speak, by the president, that not only includes provisions to accelerate a development of new opioid alternatives, but also focus more of the Medicare agency's attention on these types of alternatives. So this is the Support for Patients and Communities Act. And there's no one specific provision in this new law that addresses neuromodulation technology reimbursement, but there's various elements in there that could provide some opportunities for more attention by both payers and providers to solutions like some of the ones we've discussed today, including like peripheral nerve stimulation, and even maybe something like TENS units, more basically, as more evidence is collected. So, and more broadly, I'll also mention on this slide, beyond just obviously pain control is just one indication in this area, certainly not the only one. There's a lot of discussion of movement disorders, epilepsy, and in the future, a lot of focus on mental health disorders, neurodegenerative, et cetera. And I think a lot of that, more broadly, is the Medicare agency and some other officials have really signaled publicly in recent months that they're working hard to improve the reimbursement process specifically for innovative medical devices. That's a specific focus. It's come up several times, and it seems legitimate emphasis. So I think that's relevant to this space that we're talking in terms of reimbursement improvements potentially, or at least more transparency in the process for attaining reimbursement for these types of technologies. So that's something to look out for, and I think, it is relevant as, certainly as these types of technologies collect more data and advance into new indications. Just leave you with, just one sign that neuromodulation is, at least a bit on the radar of CMS right now. There's currently an open national coverage determination process going on for a vagus nerve stimulation for treatment-resistant depression. So this is a LivaNova device, which has been mentioned. Their primary market right now is epilepsy. The depression indication has been something that Medicare has been wary of covering in the past. But, based on a recent request from the manufacturer, they are taking a look back at this. And, this is a good opportunity to get a window into how the agency is sort of assessing and viewing this type of technology and the evidence in this space. And I think it's a general sign that they're, open to giving another look at potentially promising technologies. So this proposed coverage decision on this one is expected from CMS next month. So with that, I will, I think, wrap up my part here, and we will go forward into, what I'll do before we see if there's any additional questions we can get to. I did just want to mention briefly that we do have all the data that came, a lot of the information, data, and company information analysis that was presented here today is based on reports put together by Meddevicetracker, which produces in-depth reports on a whole host of medtech markets, and we've included in the link here, in the slides here, links to those reports that are relevant to the presentation we did today. As I mentioned, you will receive a copy of these slides so you could access those links and maybe see a little bit more where these come from. But let's see if we do have any additional questions here to assess. So there's one I see that asking about, in your experience, what are the patient and neurologist adoption drivers for external neuromodulation devices for migraines? Is that something that either one of you two, Marion or Chrystal, has any thoughts on?
Yes, so from my interviews with neurologists, they told me that, and not just for external neuromodulation devices for migraines, but for all of these devices, the use of these devices is very patient-specific, and they told me that not all devices are right for every patient. It requires discussion with the patients of the risks, of the inherent risks, and how it could benefit them. So pretty much every doctor that I've spoken with told me that they need to tailor the device to the specific patient and discuss it with them, if at all.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that makes sense, Marion. And I also see a question on, a hot topic in general, and cybersecurity challenges for portable wearable neuromodulation devices. I would say to that, certainly this is an issue for a growing proportion of devices in general nowadays, as more and more, are connected devices in some way, have some sort of remote monitoring or interaction with software systems in a hospital or mobile apps, et cetera. So certainly to the extent that any of these wearable neuromodulation devices have that component in them, I think that's something that's still, what element of that will be in there on a device by device basis. But to the extent that those do exist in any of these technologies, that's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed. I don't think it's a special issue for this area beyond any other device area. Certainly in the area of, we're seeing a lot of this in cardiovascular, where, in terms of some of the electrical devices in cardiovascular, but I think it's something that will probably come to neuromod. And FDA, people may have seen there's a number of new guidance documents, new more precise requirements for both the pre-market and post-market process for cybersecurity issues specifically when it comes to medical devices. So those are things that I think companies will need to look at and be much closer focus on than they would have. Even 5-10 years ago, there wasn't as much of a focus on it, but FDA is putting a very specific focus on that now. So it's something that these devices, if they have any connected component to them, will need to consider. With that, I think we are getting pretty close to time here. As mentioned, we will be providing a copy of these slides to all attendees, so certainly look out for that in your email in the coming day or days with these slides and information. We will, as I said, look to see some other questions that may have been submitted if we can provide some more details there. We have provided on the final slide our individual contact information for the three presenters here, as well as information to contact Informa Pharma Intelligence, which is the sponsor of our publications and this presentation. So with that, feel free to take a look at these slides and follow back up with us if the need arises. But we appreciate your interest and hope to continue to serve your information needs in the medtech space. Thanks for joining us today, and have a nice day.